That's true.
If you combine, it's not good for 3 days.
Hey everybody. My name is Karen Coombs and I'm the product manager for the OCLC Developer Network. And what I'm going to talk about is the Zend Framework and how I've discovered it sort of makes using web services easier. And because I've been using it for a bunch of projects that I've been working on related to OCLC web services, I wanted to sort of share what I've learned so far last month. So I do lots and lots of things with web services, and I spend a lot of time working with them, and I teach about them. And there's lots of useful data for libraries and web services. There's book covers and reviews and ratings and additional bibliographic data and media. There's all kinds of good stuff. But using web services can be hard. Every time I teach web services classes, people are like, oh my god, it's XML. Oh my god, I have to do XPath. Oh my god, every API is different. And so, I have to spend 2 hours reading their documentation, trying to understand how I might query it. What are all the possible parameters? And then the last thing is, how do you authenticate to it if it's an API that's actually authenticated with something other than Whiskey? So, has anybody here worked with the Twitter API since it changed to OAuth? It's evil. I mean, it makes working with other web services look like a piece of cake. So, and they aren't the only ones. Like, there's a lot of services out there now that are using OAuth, or there's some other kind of authentication more than Whiskey. So authentication can be a pain. So you have all these sort of things that are making your life more difficult when you're trying to work with web services. So what I'd like to show you is some things within the Zend Framework, some classes within the Zend Framework that can help make your life easier to avoid some of those things I mentioned at the beginning, or make them easier. So I'm going to talk about 5 basic classes, and then I'm going to talk about some service classes, meaning classes that work with particular web services. So the first class is a JSON class, and you probably will think that this is really silly. It's basically a class just to encode and decode JSON. But if you've never done that before, and you have JSON output that you need to encode or decode, this class will make it a lot easier, because it will take JSON and convert it into an object or an array in PHP, so you can easily work through it. Or if you have an object or array in PHP, you can do JSON encode on it and get back a JSON object, which if you're trying to submit a JSON object, post a JSON object to do some sort of update for the web service is important too. The second class is OAuth, which basically facilitates an OAuth, getting an OAuth token. So, you would use this class to negotiate with Twitter to get your appropriate token and then go interact with the Twitter API. So it basically facilitates that negotiation. It gives you back the token you need, and then you can give that token to your script that needs to use it to then actually make the real call to Twitter to get your status or whatever. There's 3 other ones I want to talk about. The first one's the REST client. This basically allows you to interact with RESTful web services. You can do gets and posts. You can easily set parameters in the request as an array. The data gets returned in the DOM, and so you can easily access it. The problem is it doesn't handle complex namespaces, and by complex namespaces I mean more than one namespace in the XML document. It doesn't seem to do that very well. And I also don't think it handles accept headers. So how many people here know what an accept header is? A few? Okay. So sometimes when you deal with a web service, this is the XISBN web service here, you get back the data as XML. Well, what if you wanted this data as JSON? The most common way to do that with web services is to have a parameter like format equals, and then you get JSON. The other way of doing it is something that's called content negotiation. And this is, in an HTTP request, you can do something called set the accept headers. And I think of the accept headers as sort of like the language a given client speaks. So I am capable of speaking English. That's the only language I'm capable of speaking fluently. So that's the only language that I would want to be able to transact in. So some clients are capable of transacting, accepting different kinds of formats. So what you do when you send your accept header is you say the kind of format you're capable of transacting and that you want to get back. So you can set it to JSON. Well, you can set it to JSON or XML. You can also set things more specific, like Mark XML, so on and so forth. But that's obscured. Oh, Firefox. But that's obscured in a web browser. That's all obscured. So normally the kind of accept headers that web browsers send are
Compression?
XML/XHTML or text/HTML, something like that. So that they will get, that's what they'll get back. You can set your server up so that there's a default, basically. So if no accept headers are sent, then send back this thing. So in the case of this service, it by default sends back XML. So that's what an accept header is, sort of side note. So you can't send those with this REST client, which is unfortunate because some web services, that's the only way you can get to the JSON output. But you can do nifty little things like this. So this is a really short PHP script that's using the REST client that's querying that XISBN web service. So the first two lines are Zend things that say, yes, I'm using Zend and I need this particular class. I'm getting an ISBN, I'm sending it off, I'm building a URL basically here. I'm instantiating a client to that URL here. And then this is me just setting all the parameters. So this is the method parameter, this is the format parameter, this is the FL, which is the field parameter. Set all those parameters, result, get, so I get the result back. And what's nice is because you're getting a DOM object, I can do a for each loop. For each result, ISBN as item, echo item, and then the square brackets means an attribute. If I was doing this with XPath, it would probably be about quarter to a third the size bigger. So it makes my life a little bit easier. And also, if you aren't used to working in XPath, if you've not written a lot of XPath, this probably might make sense to you more as a programmer who's used to working with arrays. I sort of came at this thing backwards. I learned all my XML stuff before I ever worked with web services, so I'm really fortunate. So I can do XPath in my sleep. But I know most of the people I work with developer network are like, oh my God, XML. You want me to do a complicated XPath expression to get the 245 subfield what? But only if certain indicators exist in Mark XML. So this removes some of that stress for them. The HTTP client is another class. It's sort of, it's actually, the REST class is built on the HTTP class. What that means is this is the mother of the REST class. And it's a little more abstracted. So it also allows you to interact with RESTful web services and do more things, get, post, put, delete. It will handle accept headers if you need to send them. And what you get back can be passed off as an XML document to something like Simple XML, which is a library in PHP for parsing XML. It's also nice because you can instantiate the client and send multiple requests to the same URL without having to reinstantiate the client. Probably the one that I found most useful is the feed one. It allows you to easily consume Atom or RSS feeds, or a single Atom entry. So if you've ever used Google's APIs and looked at a single calendar entry in Google, it's in a single Atom entry without any wrapper. It allows you to output the various parts of the Atom and modify feeds. What's really nice is it knows Dublin core. So if your Atom feed has Dublin core in it, or the syndication fields or Creative Commons namespaces, you can access all those too. And you can extend it to consume other namespaces, which rocks because the Atom that comes out of WorldCat Search API uses an OCLC terms namespace so that we can easily set it at the OCLC number in its own field. And I'm going to come back to that when I talk about extending this. So those are sort of the base classes that are really helpful for consuming services. On top of that, there are a whole bunch of classes, what are called service classes, that people have built in Zend that consume particular APIs and are set up for particular APIs. I discovered this because I was working with the Amazon Advertising API. Anybody here worked with that? No. Oh, lucky you. The way the Amazon app, and the reason I discovered it was because the way the Amazon Advertising API works, you have to construct your query, send it to the Amazon server along with your secret key and what I refer to as super secret key. Get it hashed, get it sent back to you, and then resend the query with the hash to Amazon in order to complete the actual request. So doing that hashing thing of your query is a big pain. A big, big pain. And so the Amazon, this class in Zend makes that all so easy. All you have to do is give it your two keys and what your query parameters are, and it does all that for you. Hallelujah, because after spending 8 hours trying to do it myself, I felt like I was banging my head against the wall. So it makes that all much easier. It also, there's other classes you can use. So with the Amazon one, you can do searches for specific items, look up an item by either ISBN or ASIN or UPC. You get all this information returned in an object. With the Flickr API, you can do all of these kinds of things without having to know how the Flickr API works or how to construct any of these queries. It takes it and puts it in a form so it's all object-oriented. Same thing with Delicious, if anybody's still using Delicious in their API. All this stuff related to Twitter. All this stuff you normally have to do with the Twitter API and know, okay, these are what all the parameters are. There's also, if you want to interact with URL shorteners, there's functions to interact with URL shorteners like teeny URL. I'm not sure Bitly is one of the ones that's supported, but so you could do URL shortening via teeny URLs API without having to know what the syntax is. And then there's a whole suite of extras that interact with all of Google's APIs. So I've been sort of looking at the book search data API sections of this, thinking that that might be something I want to play with. So all of this started sort of to make my life easier because I was doing particular kinds of things. But as I was thinking about it, as the product manager for the developer network, what I really wanted to do was how do I make life easier for PHP developers who want to consume OCLC's web services? Can I build my own class for, say, WorldCat Search API that would make it really easy to consume it? So that led me to this idea of extending an existing Zend class, because the Zend feed reader class processes RSS and Atom feeds. And the WorldCat Search API, when you do an open search of it, returns that. But it takes parameters. It takes a WIS key. You need to send it a keyword. You can send it max results and a start index. So I wanted to extend it to handle parameters. And lucky for me, because I know very little about object-oriented programming, I came to the Hackfest yesterday, and Matt, who works at McMaster's, who made this all so easy. So this is the code. This is it right here. This is all it takes to extend the class. So basically, we're loading the feed reader class, and then we're defining what the WorldCat URL is for an open search. Then we're going to create our own class that's called Zend Feed WorldCat and say it extends Zend Feed Reader. Then we define sort of what our function is that, the import function takes a query parameter, a format parameter, and a WIS key. Then we're going to, when we get the query parameter back, we're going to URL encode it. And then our return parent basically takes all that information and then sends it back off to the original import function within Zend Feed Reader, except for it's nicely filling in everything, pre-building it for me. Because the way that Zend Feed Reader works is it's import and the URL you want to get. So developers don't have to know now, okay, it's Q equals, and this is where the query goes, and the format, and like this is where it needs to go. All they need to do is call the function and put in the query, the format, the WIS key, and off it'll go. And what it'll return is an RSS, it'll return an object that they can walk through and pick out the pieces. So that was easier than I thought, which led me to thinking, could I extend a REST class for a particular service? So what if my services don't return Atom or RSS, like that XISVN service? Well, then instead of extending the feed class, I would extend the REST client class. This is how most of those, the Amazon class, the Flickr class, how those classes are all built, is that they are built off of the REST class. And basically, they have two functions. Well, they do two things. They build the query or queries, if there's different kinds of queries that you can do with set API. And then they process the response or responses. So that you end up with the kind of thing with Amazon where you can instantiate an Amazon object and then say, I want to do this kind of query. I want to do a lookup by ISBN. Okay, go do that. Now I get something back, and I have the something I got back. Here's the pieces that you can access. So I've just sort of started mapping this out for one of our services and how I might do that together. Do this for one of our simpler services. Because WorldCat Search API is incredibly complex, so probably not going to do that one first. The advantages of having a class in Zend is it makes development easier. It abstracts the request to the web service so that they happen in a more object-oriented way. It removes all the XPath data selection complexity for the developer. And it makes common tasks simpler to perform. So this is me using the Amazon web service. And basically what I'm doing here is I'm doing a lookup of a particular ISBN, and I'm just getting back basic metadata about it and availability. And you can see, this is it. This is my code right here. I will tell you, when I was working on this and I had to do all the hashing myself and processing the XML that came back, this was probably 4 times as long, 4 or 5 times as long. And I had to conceptually understand, okay, I need to hash this thing, and this is the structure of the Amazon XML response. And oh, by the way, this is how one does the XPath. So this made my life way, way simpler. Basically, a project that I originally started and spent 4 hours on, when I redid it, took me 15 minutes. So as somebody who's working with who's promoting OCLC's web services, there's definitely, for me, a huge value in building these kind of things to make them available for developers, to increase people's uptake with the services. So to those of you who are exposing APIs, the Canadiana folks, think about this same kind of thing, because when I come in and I want on a user API, yes, I can spend 2 or 3 hours reading your documentation, and hopefully I understand XPath and all its goodness, or JSON
got one. Karen, I don't program in PHP, but how popular is Zend? Or the people that you're out there dealing with, how many of them use Zend as a framework?
Zend is the most popular PHP framework, from what I can tell. There are basically 3 or 4 that are popular: Zend, Cake, CodeIgniter. Those 3 are probably the most popular, and Zend's the most popular. There's a part of me that's interested in this beyond library land as well, because we have a lot of, I don't want to say problems, issues.
Challenges.
Challenges. We have a lot of challenges with our commercial partners. We have a lot of challenges with our commercial partners who don't know what Mark XML is, who don't know anything about libraries, who don't know what Mark XML is, and come to consume our services. And they don't like XML, most of them. And then we have scary library XML on top of the fact that it's XML. So, and a lot of those folks use frameworks. If they're a PHP programmer, they use frameworks. If they're, another language, they probably still use a framework, just a framework for that language. So it seems to me like if we want to get greater uptake beyond library land, and maybe somewhat in library land in terms of trying to reach an audience whose programming skills are still slowly growing, that things like frameworks make things easier. And so that's what I'm trying to do, is think about how to make things easier, because the development community in libraries is this huge spectrum of, I know how to take a JavaScript and change one element of it and cut it and paste it in my web screen too. I know how to write my own object-oriented classes and everybody in between. And so to get uptake in the services and feel like we're serving the community effectively, and try to work to address the needs of all those folks. And right now, I think it's easiest for people who have more programming skill to use our APIs than if you have less programming skill. So I'm trying to sort of drive back down the tree to people who aren't as comfortable manipulating our XML with XML and that kind of thing. Any other questions? Yeah.
What is the license?
I think this is BSD, I think. I know it's an open source license, and I know it's not GPL. I think it's BSD or Apache 2, and I can't remember which. But their documentation of the different classes